They said my farmland had been rezoned without ever asking me. Then they showed up with bulldozers on land that's been in my family for 5 generations. But here's what they didn't know. I'm the county building inspector, and I'm not backing down. I've walked this land since I was a boy. My grandfather taught me how to turn soil, fix a fence post, and honor what was ours, not just through title or deed, but through care. That's why I felt the blood drain from my face when I saw unfamiliar stakes lining the south pasture and strangers in polo shirts marking my soil like it belonged to them. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some land survey gone off course, until a woman stepped forward, sunglasses perched on her nose, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as Eleanor Hargrove, president of something called the Meadowlark Estates HOA. I remember blinking at her, confused. HOA? Out here on a private farm? She waved a folder filled with papers that looked official, county stamps, signatures, and my name scrawled across the bottom of a rezoning form I had never seen. Your property, she said calmly, has been incorporated into our development plans. We'll be breaking ground on a convenience center next week. My first thought? This has to be a scam. I flipped through the documents. Everything looked legitimate, except one thing. That wasn't my signature. When I told her that, her smile didn't budge. She simply said, "You'll need to speak to our attorneys." Behind her, workers kept pounding stakes into my field, ignoring me like I was the trespasser. That's when I realized something chilling. They weren't asking. They were taking. Boldly, quietly, and with confidence that no one would stop them. I tried to keep calm. I didn't tell them who I really was, a senior inspector for the county. That might be my only card to play. But as she drove off, she left me with one last threat wrapped in a smile. Sheriff Daniels is on our board. I'd think twice before making this difficult. The deeper betrayal hadn't even set in yet. I'd grown up believing in rules, in paperwork, in property lines and fair play. But now I was seeing something else. A well-connected group willing to bend the law, bully a landowner, and rewrite the rules, just to take what wasn't theirs. And worse, they were just getting started. I expected pushback. I didn't expect silence. The morning after the confrontation in the field, I made phone calls, lots of them, to the zoning office, to the planning commission, even to the HOA office listed on Eleanor Hargrove's paperwork. No answers. Just voicemails, disconnected numbers, and a polite but dismissive clerk who promised someone would get back to me. That someone never did. By noon, a letter was taped to my front gate. Bright yellow paper stamped, "Urgent." It was a cease and desist order against me. According to the document, I had been interfering with a legally sanctioned development. I stood on my porch rereading it twice, my hands shaking, heart pounding. Interfering? On my own land? My next thought was to call the sheriff's office. Maybe a mistake had been made, and we could resolve this calmly. But the deputy who arrived that afternoon wasn't one I knew. His tone was flat, unmoved, as if I were just another nuisance in a long list of troublemakers. "Ms. Hargrove has filed formal complaints," he told me. "The HOA has been granted temporary access by the county." Temporary access? To my farm? When I asked to see the paperwork, he simply shrugged and said, "It's all on file." But none of it made sense. There hadn't been a public notice, no hearing, no rezoning application I'd signed, and worst of all, no one seemed to care. That night, I barely slept. Through the curtains, I watched vehicle headlights slow roll past my house, more than once. My dog growled at the window, tail stiff, eyes alert. I grabbed Grandpa's old shotgun, not to use it, but to remind myself of the roots I stood on. The next morning, they returned. Bulldozers, trucks, more men in hard hats. Eleanor stood near the fence line in a designer coat and boots that had never seen dirt. She didn't speak to me this time. She just watched, arms folded, as her workers unloaded survey equipment and drove stakes deeper into the land. This wasn't miscommunication. This was orchestration. Later that day, a friend from the county office whispered the truth I was beginning to suspect. "Eleanor's husband," he said, "is a partner in MGC Holdings, the company developing the site, and the county executive, her brother-in-law. This thing's rigged from the top. And so the pieces began to fall into place. It wasn't just that they were building without permits. It was how they'd gotten this far. Connections, cover-ups, and a ruthless belief that no one would stop them. To them, I wasn't a neighbor. I wasn't even a person. I was just an obstacle to be pushed aside, a title to be rewritten. But I wasn't going anywhere. And if they thought I'd go quietly, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. The night after the bulldozers showed up uninvited, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by old land deeds, tax maps, and every legal document Grandpa ever filed. The farmhouse was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional howl of wind through the rafters. I wasn't just looking for paperwork, I was looking for proof. And something told me it was buried here. An hour into my search, I found it. Folded into an envelope marked, "Not for filing, keep copy," was a hand-drawn boundary map from 50 years ago, notarized and stamped. The land they were trying to build on? Still registered under my family name. No easements, no transfers, no amendments. Nothing legally gave them access, not without my signature, but that wasn't all. I picked up my phone and called Marcos from the county office. He was one of the few I trusted. "Pull everything on Meadowlark Estates and MGC Holdings," I said, "and see if my signature appears anywhere in the permit files." His answer came back 2 hours later. "Something's not right," he said, voice low. "There's a rezoning application with your name on it, but you didn't sign it, right?" "No," I replied flatly. "I most certainly did not." "Then we've got forgery," he said, "and that's a felony." The adrenaline kicked in. I was no longer confused. I was determined. The next morning, I drove to the county archives myself. As a county inspector, I still had backroom access, at least for now. I scanned files, printed documents, took photos with timestamps, and what I saw chilled me. Signatures from a commissioner who was on medical leave. Missing environmental impact reports. Fake meeting minutes. Dozens of missing pages in records that should have been locked down. It wasn't just a rogue HOA anymore. This was organized, systematic, and happening under everyone's nose. Back at the farm, I installed new trail cameras around the perimeter. Silent watchers in the trees. That night, I caught Eleanor's crew snooping near the barn. No permits, no explanations, just flashlights sweeping across my windows. They thought I'd be easy to push around because I was alone. But they forgot something important. People like me don't scare easy. Especially not on land that's been in the family for generations. Especially not when I hold the law in one hand and a paper trail in the other. By morning, I had a folder full of evidence. And my first real weapon in this fight. The next step wasn't to yell or protest, it was to play their game with sharper tools. And I had just begun to sharpen mine. At first, I thought I was fighting one crooked HOA president. One bad egg with a taste for power and no respect for property lines. But by the end of that week, it was clear. I was fighting an entire machine. The deeper I dug, the darker things became. With Marcos's help at the county office, we began connecting dots that weren't supposed to be connected. And what started as isolated irregularities turned into a pattern, one that stretched far beyond my farm. The permit for the gas station? It didn't just have my forged signature. It was also stamped with the signature of Commissioner Jackson, a man who'd been on medical leave when the document was supposedly signed. Marcos checked his absence records twice. "This stamp," he said, pointing to the approval box, "is from a week he was in the hospital recovering from surgery. There's no way this is legitimate." We cross-checked other permits filed under MGC Holdings, the shell company tied to the HOA, and saw a disturbing trend. No environmental reports. No public hearing notes. No county oversight. The signatures approving those permits? Mostly from people connected to the Hargrove family, Eleanor's husband, her cousin, her brother-in-law. It got worse. The zoning office server, where we stored official county maps and property histories, had mysteriously crashed 2 days earlier. Files missing, histories rewritten. My land, according to the new uploads, had already been transferred to Metowark Estates through a community development agreement. No one ever asked me, no one ever told me. I slammed my fist on the table in disbelief. This wasn't just fraud, it was collusion at the highest level of our local government. The HOA, the county commissioners, even the sheriff. They were all connected through family ties, campaign contributions, or cozy business contracts. The deeper we looked, the more we realized the system wasn't broken. It had been built this way, and I wasn't the first to be caught in it. I met Margaret Tanner, an elderly widow who'd lost her home last year to a sudden reassessment that tripled her HOA fees. She couldn't pay in time. They foreclosed, and days later, construction began on a private parking lot. I met Richard Gonzalez, a retired judge forced out with threats of scandal when he questioned land transfers happening too quietly, too fast. His story matched mine down to the last forged stamp. Everywhere we looked, there was someone who'd been pushed out, priced out, or scared into silence. The Hargroves didn't just want my land. They wanted every piece of ground that could turn a profit, so they could pave it, pump it, or build luxury developments on top of it. The law didn't matter. What mattered was who controlled the paper, the process, and the people. But now that I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it, and I couldn't ignore it either. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice. And if they thought a scared homeowner was easy to silence, they hadn't reckoned with someone who remembered what this country was built on: property, liberty, and the truth. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was standing up for every family they'd steamrolled. And I was coming for them, with evidence, witnesses, and the full weight of the law they thought they could twist. They wanted a war? Well, they'd just declared one. I knew the moment I exposed their scheme they'd come for me. But I didn't think they'd move so fast or hit so hard. It started quietly. A formal envelope in my mailbox marked urgent. Inside was a notice from the county executive's office. My job as senior building inspector was under budgetary review. I'd heard those words before. They don't mean review, they mean removal. The next morning, I arrived at the county building to find my access badge had been deactivated. A security guard I'd known for years gave me a sad look as he handed me a cardboard box. "They told me to escort you out," he said, not meeting my eyes. Effective immediately. No hearing, no explanation, no chance to fight back. I was no longer just the county inspector who'd uncovered fraud. I was an unemployed woman with a farm under siege, and no official title to defend it. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Anonymous messages, strange calls from numbers with no caller ID. One voicemail chilled me to the bone. Some land just isn't worth dying over. When I got home, I found my mailbox pried open. Inside was a plastic toy gas station, painted with my farm's address number. It sat there, mocking me. A message, clear as day. They didn't just want to build, they wanted to erase me. Then came the foreclosure notice. Somehow, the Hardgroves had convinced the local bank I was delinquent on payments. I wasn't. I had every receipt. But the mortgage servicer they used? You guessed it. Derek Hargrove's company. The paperwork was misfiled, they claimed. Now I had 30 days to prove I'd paid, or lose my home. The lights flickered. My internet cut out. Then I received a utilities shut-off warning. They were squeezing me from every direction. I barely had time to react before the next blow landed. A new letter, this one from the county assessor's office, declared that a community development agreement had transferred ownership of my property to Metowark Estates. The document included a forged signature, mine. My knees buckled. My land, my family's land, was now in someone else's name. And still, they weren't done. That night, I heard engines outside. 3 bulldozers stood idling just beyond my garden fence. Men in hard hats loitered nearby, waiting for the go-ahead. A black SUV rolled up. Eleanor Hargrove stepped out, dressed like she was attending a charity gala, not a land grab. "You've got 48 hours to leave," she said with a smile. "After that, things get irreversible." I clenched my fists, jaw tight. "This is illegal." Her smile widened. Talk to the sheriff, or maybe your judge, or your bank manager. You'll find they're all very sympathetic to us." My voice shook. "I'll go to the media. I'll file federal complaints." "Do that," she said, turning back to her SUV. "But ask yourself, what kind of future do you really have without a job, without land, without proof?" I stood there, heart pounding, as the taillights disappeared into the night. My dog barked nervously behind me. Somewhere deep in the house, my phone buzzed again. Another text. "Last warning. People who dig too deep tend to get buried." I sat down on the porch steps, the cold wood biting into my skin. They'd taken everything but my courage, and now they were about to find out that was the one thing they could never buy, break, or bulldoze. The room was packed. I stood at the back of the county hearing chamber, heart pounding as neighbors, reporters, and community members filled every seat. The Hardgroves sat confidently at the center table, Thomas straightening his tie, Eleanor flipping through papers with that same smug smile she wore the morning she trespassed on my land. I was no longer just a voice crying out in the dark. I was here with evidence, backup, and a truth too large to bury. Council members settled into their chairs. Thomas rose and spoke first, voice steady and polished. "All documents were filed correctly. These wild accusations? Misinformation. The server crash was unfortunate, but there's no wrongdoing here." Whispers rippled through the room. I stepped forward, flash drive in hand. "Actually," I said calmly, "I kept my own copies." The projector screen flickered on. Permit records, forged signatures, zoning maps altered by hand. Gasps filled the chamber. Then came the audio. A recording of Thomas's voice, clear as day. "Nobody will notice the forgeries. I've paid off the right people. If that inspector keeps digging, we'll handle her like the Riverdale problem." The silence that followed was electric. Eleanor's face paled. Thomas lunged toward the podium. "This is a setup!" But before he could reach me, the back doors opened with a bang. FBI agents stepped into the room, badges raised. "Thomas and Eleanor Hargrove," Agent Carter announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, forgery, and wire fraud." Gasps turned to cheers. Neighbors who once looked away now stood and clapped. Mrs. Tanner, cane in hand, wiped away tears. Even the judge who once looked the other way nodded solemnly. As they were led out in handcuffs, Eleanor twisted toward me. "This isn't over," she hissed. I met her glare without flinching. "Actually, it is." In that moment, everything shifted. The fear that had haunted my every step melted away, replaced by something stronger, justice, hard-won and undeniable. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a reckoning for everyone they'd bullied, stolen from, and silenced. And finally, the truth had the loudest voice in the room. The courtroom was quiet now, the seats mostly empty, but the impact of the verdict still echoed in my ears. Guilty on all counts. After months of tension, sleepless nights, and standing against the most powerful family in the county, justice had finally been served. Outside, the sun was setting over my grandfather's farm, the same land the HOA tried to steal, now safe and thriving again. Where bulldozers once sat, rows of vegetables were taking root. Chickens scratched freely in the yard. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed without fear. But I hadn't done this alone. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now brought over casseroles, pulled weeds, and repaired fences. The resistance group, those brave, determined seniors from the diner, had become a cornerstone of our new community. Mrs. Tanner, cane in hand, now chaired our neighborhood oversight committee. Harold was helping teach kids to plant tomatoes in the very soil where a gas station nearly stood. Even Richard, the former judge, now offered free legal advice at our town library every Thursday. This wasn't just a victory for me. It was a win for all of us. For the teacher forced out of her home. For the retired couple buried under false fees. For every neighbor silenced, shamed, or pushed aside by people who thought their power made them untouchable. Together, we proved otherwise. The county has since passed new regulations, stricter transparency for HOA organizations, environmental protections restored, and an independent committee to investigate zoning complaints. Marcos, my brave friend from the inside, was appointed director of that very committee. And though I turned down the FBI's offer to join their fraud task force, I did agree to host quarterly workshops for rural homeowners, teaching them how to protect their property rights. I've gone back to inspecting buildings, but I also tend my garden more, laugh more, and take time to sit on the porch, sipping sweet tea with folks who, just months ago, were strangers. The land is quieter now, but not silent. It hums with life, children's laughter, hammers repairing barns, the rustle of wind through healthy trees. It's the sound of a community rebuilding itself, the right way. And every time I walk the gravel path my grandfather laid with his own hands, I'm reminded of something my sister once said. What they tried to destroy became the very thing that brought everyone together. She was right. They tried to tear us down. Instead, we rose. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. You're never too old, too small, or too outnumbered to make a difference. Not when you stand up for what's right. Not when you're protecting the people and places you love. I didn't ask for a fight. I only wanted to tend to my land, to keep a piece of my family's legacy alive. But when corruption came knocking, when lies were written on official letterhead and bulldozers rolled in uninvited, I had a choice: stay quiet or speak up, and I chose to speak. It wasn't easy. I lost sleep. I lost my job. I almost lost my home. But I gained something much greater: the courage to stand firm and the power of community. Friends. I never knew I had stepped forward. Neighbors who'd once felt helpless found their voices. People who had been silenced for years finally felt heard. In the end, it wasn't just about the land. It was about showing others, especially those who thought they were too old or too alone, that you're never out of the fight. You can face giants, even if you're just one person with a binder full of truth and a good pair of walking boots. To anyone listening who's been through something unfair, who's been told to sit down, be quiet, or give up, don't. You've lived too long and seen too much to doubt your own strength now. Whether it's your home, your health, or your dignity on the line, you have every right to stand your ground. And if you're lucky, you'll find, just like I did, that you're not standing alone. So plant your garden, keep your porch light on, know your rights, and when the time comes, don't be afraid to speak loudly and walk proudly, because the older we get, the more powerful our stories become. And sometimes, all it takes is one brave voice to remind a whole town what it means to stand together.